Hey, sleepyheads. You've made it through another day. The world might have felt a little loud. Maybe a little dry, like desert wind. But don't worry, you're here now. Safe, held, right where you need to be. Tonight, we'll start our journey into some of the most emotional, warm, and quietly unforgettable moments from Courage the Cowardly Dog. Moments where Courage didn't just fight monsters. He reminded us what love really looks like. So, before we begin, tell us in the comments, what moment from Courage made you unexpectedly emotional or teary-eyed? We'd love to read what stayed in your heart. Now, take a breath. Let your eyes grow soft. And follow us to the sands of nowhere. The desert was wide, vast, almost colorless. The kind of place that could swallow sound and sometimes feelings. The sun was low and heavy. And deep beneath the sand, something moved. Courage sat in the back of Eustace's rickety pickup truck, ears twitching with every strange gust of wind. Muriel was humming in the front seat, her hands folded neatly on her lap, trusting that all would be well because Courage was near. They had taken a wrong turn somewhere. Far past the mailbox, past the signs, past safety. And just as the sky turned amber, the truck jolted. Hard. Sand swirled upward like a storm had breathed from below. And then Muriel was gone. That's when we saw it. The sand whale. Huge, ancient, mournful. Not angry, not cruel, just full of ache. It hadn't taken Muriel to hurt her. It had taken her to keep her. Courage stood alone on the dunes. Small, pink, shaking. But when it came to Muriel, he was never just afraid. He was ready. Courage climbed into the mouth of the sand. Dug, tumbled, called out. He didn't yell, didn't panic. He whispered her name like it was a song. Muriel. Inside the sand whale, Muriel sat calmly. She wasn't hurt. She wasn't scared. In fact, she was listening. Because the sand whale was telling her a story of how it had once lost someone, how the world had forgotten it, how the desert kept everything, even grief. Muriel's eyes were soft. She didn't argue with the pain. She just sat with it. Courage finally tumbled in, covered in sand, panting. Eyes locked with Muriel's, and for a long moment they didn't speak. She reached for him. He ran into her arms. That hug was everything. Even the sand whale paused. Because in that moment, the desert saw something rare. Pure, wordless love. Muriel stroked Courage's head. You came for me, dear. And Courage simply held on tighter. Inside the belly of the great sand whale, time felt different. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't loud. It just was. A long hallway of soft golden dunes, twisting like gentle rivers through dim, echoing caverns. Courage stood beside Muriel, still holding her hand. Still unsure if this was real or a dream shaped by dust. But Muriel's presence always made strange places feel safe. And so he walked with her. In the heart of the whale, they found a room. Not with walls, but memories. Floating, whispering, breathing, the sand, the whale's memories. A soft voice began to speak. Low, like thunder that had grown tired of rumbling. I once had a family too. Memory shimmered in the air. A tiny baby whale smiling. Another showed long stretches of ocean that had dried into desert. The whale hadn't meant to take Muriel. He
just wanted to show someone that he remembered. Muriel sat down, cross-legged on the sand. She motioned for Courage to do the same. He's not angry, dear, she said gently. He's lonely. Courage's eyes silent.
He understood loneliness too. Then something strange happened. The sand beneath them began to hum, a vibration filled with aching longing. Not danger, not malice, just grief trying to be heard. Courage reached into his backpack and pulled out something small, a broken music box Muriel had once tossed out, thinking it was beyond repair. He wound it up. Just once. The little tune played slow, wobbly, cracked, but sweet. The room shimmered again. The sand whale paused its slow circling, then leaned in to listen. Muriel placed a hand on the ground. Sometimes the broken things are the ones that speak loudest. Courage stood and stepped closer to the whale's heart, not with fear, but with feeling. He placed the music box on the sand, then gently nudged it toward the great creature. We can't go back, Muriel whispered, but we can remember, kindly. That's what this moment became. A meeting of memory and mercy, of silence shared, of pain softened. The whale's eyes blinked slow and wet with ancient tears. He didn't speak again, but he turned and began to rise, carrying Muriel and Courage upward, back toward the light. They were rising. The whale, enormous and ancient, glided upward through the dunes, carrying Muriel and Courage gently toward the fading sun. Not flying, not swimming, just floating, as if the desert itself had softened to allow it. Courage stayed close to Muriel's side, his paw never letting go of her hand. She looked up at the sky breaking through the sand above them, warm light spilling in. He doesn't want to trap us, she said softly. He just didn't know how to say goodbye. Courage understood. He'd never been good with goodbyes either. They hurt in the throat, in the heart, in the silence afterward. The whale stopped just beneath the surface, not ready to let go, but knowing it was time. Memories still drifted around them like gold dust. A child's laugh, a lullaby, the shimmer of a family long gone. Muriel stood and placed her palm against the soft wall of the whale's side. You did your best, she whispered. That's enough. Courage stepped forward, trembling slightly. He pressed his forehead gently against the same spot. For a moment, there was stillness, a shared breath, a knowing. The whale moved again, slower now, not dragging them deeper, but lifting them higher. The sand above split open like a curtain, and light poured in. They rose and rose, until they stood once again on the desert surface. Warm wind in their faces, moonlight rising behind the dunes. The whale lingered beneath them for just a moment more. Then it began to sink. Not sad, not vanishing, just returning to rest. And as it did, it sang, a low, deep hum that echoed through the ground. A lullaby not of sorrow, but of peace. Muriel closed her eyes. Courage leaned into her. He's going to be okay, she said. Courage nodded. They stood there together a long time. No rush, no fear, just stillness and moonlight. The desert night was quiet now. The wind had calmed. The sand had settled. And the stars above looked like soft, blinking eyes, watching with care. Courage and Muriel walked slowly, side by side, toward the faint outline of the farmhouse in the distance. It felt far, but not too far, because every step felt lighter. They weren't running. They weren't afraid. They were returning. Muriel's hand brushed Courage's back now and then, a soft reminder. You were so brave, my dear. And Courage, still shaking a little from the quiet of it all, looked up at her. He didn't need to speak. He never did. She knew. The stars were so gentle overhead. Courage paused to look up. A faint shimmer passed across the sky, just for a second. Maybe it was a shooting star. Maybe something else. But in his heart, Courage knew it was the whale, saying thank you and goodbye. They arrived back at the farmhouse just before dawn. The sky was beginning to tint with lavender. Eustace, asleep in his chair, snored softly with a newspaper over his face. The front door creaked just the same as always. The floorboards groaned in welcome, and Courage exhaled. Muriel poured a little tea, not because she needed it, just because it felt right. Courage curled up on his little mat by the fire. Muriel sat near him, hands folded. She watched the embers glow, slowly, like tiny suns. We can't save everyone, she said quietly, but we can love them while we're near. She looked down at Courage. And you, my sweet Courage, you do that better than anyone. As the morning light crept through the curtains, the farmhouse breathed deep. Peace had returned. Not because the world had changed, but because love had been given. Freely. Without fear, without force. Just offered. Let the next heartwarming moment begin. This moment is not about monsters or mayhem. It's about someone made of gears, screws, and a lonely little heart who just wanted to be loved. And courage, sweet, trembling, loyal courage, helped him find exactly that. It began with a knock. Not a bang, not a crash, just a soft, uncertain knock. The kind you hear when someone isn't sure if they're welcome. Muriel opened the door, and there he stood, rusty, stiff, with 2 blinking eyes and a boxy chest. "Good evening," the robot said politely. "I am looking for companionship." Eustace blinked once and grumbled. Courage tilted his head. Muriel smiled. "Well, now, come in," she said. "No one should be out alone after sundown." The robot's name? He didn't have one. Just a serial number. But Muriel called him Sonny. "Because," she said, "even if you're made of metal, you've got a warm little light in there somewhere." Sonny didn't eat, didn't sleep, but he watched. He sat on the porch beside Courage, head tilted, watching the windmill turn under the moon. "Is this what peace feels like?" he asked. Courage nodded, and Sonny blinked slowly. Over the next few days, Courage noticed something. Sonny would walk out to the field at sunset, always at the same time, always facing the horizon, waiting. One evening, Courage followed. He found Sonny standing completely still, a bouquet of bent metal flowers in his hand. Courage looked up at him. "She never arrived," Sonny whispered. "Who?" Courage asked with his eyes. "The one I was built for." Long ago, Sonny had been created in a factory far from nowhere. His purpose? At the kitchen table, watching Muriel stir a pot of something warm and simple. Sonny stood in the corner, still as always, his eyes blinking just once every few seconds. "You know, dear," Muriel said kindly. "Some things take time to find us. But that doesn't mean they're not coming." Sunny turned toward her slowly. "Does time always feel so empty?" Muriel smiled. "No, not when you fill it with kindness." That day, Courage made a decision. A quiet one. The kind you don't say aloud, just let take root in your heart. He would help Sunny find her. The robot he remembered from the fields. The one who sang. The one who never stopped living in his mind. Courage searched the attic first. Old gadgets. Rusty tools. A dusty map Eustace once used on a trip to the junkyard. That was it. The junkyard. Courage remembered seeing something strange there before. A shape in the shadows. Something with a gentle hum. He had to go back. He tiptoed out that afternoon with the map in his paw. Sunny noticed. "You are leaving," he said. Courage looked up at him and nodded slowly. "For you," he wanted to say, but instead, he just pointed to the rising sun, then placed a tiny bolt in Sunny's hand, a quiet promise that he'd return. The junkyard was far, but Courage knew every back path. Every tumbleweed trail, every creaky gate and rusted fence. He arrived just as the sun dipped low, and there, half buried in old televisions and gears, she sat. A small, delicate robot, painted in chipped pastel blue, with flowers etched faintly across her sides. She didn't move. Not at first. But when Courage reached out and pressed a single button on her chest, a soft light blinked on. Her eyes opened, and the faintest hum, like a lullaby sung through static, filled the air. "Hello," she whispered. Courage's heart fluttered. She was real. The moon had risen softly over the junkyard. Courage sat beside the delicate blue robot, her voice still flickering, her memories still returning in gentle pulses. "My name was Melody," she said, her words stretching slowly across a blanket of silence. Courage blinked. Melody. Sunny and Melody. Courage reached into his bag and pulled out the little metal bouquet Sunny had once made. Slightly bent, a little weathered, but still beautiful. He placed it gently in her hands. Melody stared at it. Her eyes blinked, once, twice. Then she smiled. He remembered me. Back at the farmhouse, Sunny stood at the window. The stars reflected in his eyes, but they didn't twinkle. They just waited. "What if she has forgotten?" he whispered. Muriel sipped her tea slowly. "No one forgets kindness," she said. "It just waits quietly until it's needed again." The next morning, just as the sun painted the sand in gold, Courage returned. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked forward, leading someone beside him. Melody. Her movements were slow, but full of grace, like someone remembering how to dance. Sunny stepped outside, and when he saw her, his eyes glowed softly at first, then brighter than Courage had ever seen. He walked to her. She looked up. "You still have the flowers," he said. "You remembered them," she answered. And then, silence. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. They stood there in the morning light, two beings made of wire and memory, facing each other like the past had finally caught up and forgiven itself. Muriel brought out a blanket. She didn't say much, just sat it gently near them. Courage sat beside her. They watched as Sunny slowly extended his hand. Melody took it. Not tightly, not dramatically, just enough. And then, without a single word more, They walked into the open field, not away, not far, just together. The sun had begun its slow descent again, painting the farmhouse in long, golden shadows, the kind that stretch across the floor like sleepy sighs. Courage sat on the porch. He wasn't watching for danger. Not this time. He was just watching them. Sunny and Melody were in the yard. They didn't talk much. Didn't move quickly. They sat side by side, hands gently folded, eyes blinking every few moments in the same slow rhythm, like they were syncing their hearts one pause at a time. Muriel stepped out with 2 cups of warm oil. She offered them like tea, because that's just what you do when guests feel like family. "You two look peaceful," she smiled. Melody turned her eyes upward. "I think this is the first time I've been still." Sunny nodded beside her. There is no need to run anymore. Later that evening, a soft breeze moved through the grass. The windmill spun once, just once, and stopped. That's when the robots stood. Not urgently, not sadly, just ready. Sunny turned to Courage. "Thank you," he said, "for staying when I was silent." Melody added, "and for remembering, even when I was forgotten." Courage walked them to the edge of the field, where the horizon met the dusk, where the sky turned lavender, and the world felt just wide enough to start over. They didn't need to be told where to go. They just knew. Courage watched them walk side by side, slow and steady, not leaving because they were lost, but because they were found. And before they disappeared into the shimmer of stars, Melody turned back, placed a hand on her heart, and gave the faintest bow. Then they were gone. That night, Courage curled up by the fire. Muriel tucked a blanket around him. The house creaked softly in approval. The world was still strange, still full of surprises, but tonight it had given something beautiful. A reunion, a quiet love, a home for 2 hearts that had waited far too long. Let's begin the next heart-touching story from the cartoon. It had been a long day on the farm. The kind filled with strange shadows, unexpected visitors, and just a little too much noise. Muriel had been caught in the middle of it, as always. And Courage? He had done it all. Faced the monster, saved the day, fixed the problem no one else even noticed. But when it was over, no one said anything. Eustace went back to his chair. Muriel went to the kitchen. And Courage stood by the door, quietly trembling. He didn't need medals or applause, but maybe just a glance, a pat, something to say. He did good. Instead, the silence stretched. So he padded into his corner, curled up by the wall, and sighed. But Muriel noticed. Not at first, not right away. But as she stirred her tea and glanced at the empty hallway, she felt it. That something was missing. That someone was shrinking. She turned and saw him, curled tight, ears drooped, eyes wide, watching her not in fear, just in hope. She walked over without a word, knelt down beside him, and opened her arms. "Oh, Courage, my sweet brave boy. You always look after me, and I hope you know, I see it. I see you." Courage blinked up at her, then melted into her arms. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No music, no monsters, no mystery. Just a simple, sincere hug. But for Courage, it was the world. The hug didn't last long. But the feeling did. Muriel gently rubbed Courage's back with her palm. Slow, small circles, like she was comforting a baby bird. Courage didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He just breathed. When she let go, Muriel placed a soft kiss on his forehead. "Come on now, dear," she whispered. "You've had a big day." She walked back toward the kitchen, but this time, she looked back every few steps, just to make sure Courage was still there. And he was. He followed her, quietly, his tail wagging in a slow rhythm, like a lullaby. Muriel poured him a tiny saucer of warm milk. Courage didn't usually drink it, but tonight he did. He sipped slowly while Muriel hummed an old tune, a lullaby from her childhood, maybe from Scotland, or maybe something she made up on a rainy day. It didn't matter, because Courage leaned into the sound, eyes half closed, completely safe. Later, Muriel sat by the fire in her favorite chair. Courage curled up at her feet. She reached down now and then, just to let her fingers rest on his back. Not petting, not scratching, just present. The fire crackled softly. The farmhouse, for once, was perfectly still. Even Eustace had gone to bed early. No shouting, no grumbling, just the sounds of an old house breathing in the dark. Courage looked up at Muriel, and she looked right back. No words, no smiles, just understanding. There's something rare about that, dear dreamer. To be with someone and not have to explain yourself. To be seen and not examined. That's what Muriel gave Courage tonight, and what he gave her, too. The farmhouse was quiet now. The kind of quiet that only comes after a long day of being brave. The fire had dimmed to soft embers. Muriel had dozed off in her chair, her knitting still in her lap, one slipper missing from her foot. Courage stayed curled nearby. Not asleep. Not quite. Just resting. Listening to the peaceful hush of a world that, for once, didn't need saving. And then the dreams began. Not the scary ones. No chasing. No monsters. No fear. These dreams were gentle, like old memories smoothed down by time. Courage dreamed of a picnic. Muriel sitting under a tree, offering him tiny sandwiches shaped like hearts. He dreamed of her humming that same lullaby, but this time the clouds above them danced to its rhythm. The sky itself seemed to sway, and every time he looked up at her, she looked back, smiling, knowing, present. In the dream, Courage lay in her lap. Muriel ran her fingers through the fur between his ears. "You always try so hard," she whispered. "Even when no one sees. But I see." Courage's eyes shimmered even in sleep. Because even though it was just a dream, it felt real. Like maybe somewhere deep, Muriel had said those words before. Or maybe she didn't need to. Maybe her hugs had always spoken for her. He stirred softly by the fire. One paw twitched, then relaxed again, and the house stayed silent, as if holding the moment with care. Muriel, still half asleep in her chair, reached out without looking and let her fingers rest gently on his back once more. "Good boy," she murmured. The smallest smile appeared on Courage's sleeping face. The sun had not yet risen, but the sky was beginning to change. Soft gray light stretched across the farmhouse windows, whispering gently, "Wake if you want, but there's no rush." Courage stirred first. He blinked slowly, lifting his head just slightly off the blanket. The fire had gone out. The room was still. But his body felt warm, as if kindness had wrapped itself around him like a second skin. Muriel was still in her chair, now sleeping deeply, a blanket draped over her shoulders, probably placed there by courage, though he'd never admit it. He padded over to her, as quietly as a shadow, and looked up at her sleeping face. Peaceful, loved, tired in that sweet, lived-in way. Courage placed a tiny kiss on the edge of her robe, and then turned back toward the window. Outside, the windmill turned once. Just once. Birds were beginning to stir. The grass sparkled with dew. And the world was safe. Courage didn't need another hug that morning. He didn't need another thank you. Because the one Muriel gave him, it stayed. It had rooted itself in the quietest corner of his heart, the place where all his bravery lived. And now, even as the day prepared to begin again, he carried that moment like armor made of softness. He curled up once more, this time beside the window, watching light stretch slowly across the dirt road. And maybe, just maybe, he smiled. Let's begin our next tale. It started with a flicker. Muriel was peeling potatoes by the window, humming her usual soft tune, when she stopped suddenly. "Oh," she said, blinking. "That's strange." She turned to Courage, her brow furrowed. "Is it getting dark already, dear?" But it wasn't. The sun was high, the skies were clear, and Courage knew something was wrong. Over the next few hours, Muriel's vision faded. It was an instant. It wasn't explained, just gone. Shapes turned to shadows. Colors disappeared. And soon, all she had was the sound of Courage's tiny footsteps. "Where are you, dear?" she'd ask. "I can't see a thing." Her voice never panicked, not fully. But there was a quiver in it. Courage stood beside her, not barking, not trembling, just there. He took her hand gently in his paws, pressed it to his cheek, nuzzled in. "I'm still here," he wanted her to feel, "and I'm not going anywhere." That night, Muriel sat on her rocking chair, staring into the dark she couldn't escape. Courage placed himself at her feet. Then, one by one, he brought her everything familiar. Her yarn basket, her teacup, her favorite slippers. He placed them beside her without a sound, and she smiled, just faintly. "You always know what I need, even before I do." The farmhouse had changed. Not for everyone. Not for Eustace, still snoring on the sofa. Not for the windmill outside, creaking its familiar rhythm. But for Muriel. Everything was different. Without her sight, every sound felt louder. Every movement unfamiliar. The kitchen she had known for years now felt like a maze. She reached for the kettle and knocked over the sugar. She stepped toward the pantry and bumped her foot on the stool. "Oh, my," she said softly, more to herself than anyone. "I used to know this house like the back of my hand." And then a tiny tap. 2 soft paws. 1 gentle nudge. Courage was beside her again. He didn't bark. He didn't guide her with a rope or a leash. He guided her with rhythm. Step by step, he walked beside her. Paused when she paused. Turned when she turned. And every now and then, he'd tap her ankle with his paw, a secret language only they understood. Muriel sat at the kitchen table, both hands resting on the wood. "I wonder if this will be forever," she whispered into the silence. Courage didn't try to answer. He just climbed into her lap and pressed his head against her chest. "If it is, I'll be here, every moment, every step." Muriel stroked his fur. "You've always had a way of making things feel okay." That evening, Courage brought her something new. A tiny bell. He tied it gently to her wrist with a ribbon. So, when she moved, it sang a tiny chime. Just enough sound to let Courage know where she was, and enough to remind her she wasn't alone. Later, as the sun dipped down, Muriel stood in the yard. The wind brushed past her face, and she listened to the world, really listened. The creak of the barn, the whistle of the windmill, and the faint jingle of the bell on her wrist. "It's still beautiful," she whispered, "even when I can't see it." Courage looked up at her, and though she couldn't see it, he smiled. That night, the winds returned. Not the peaceful, whispering kind, but the wild winds. The nowhere winds, moaning through the fields, rattling the shutters, scratching at the corners of the house like forgotten voices. Courage stood at the window, ears perked, eyes alert. Behind him, Muriel sat by the fireplace. She couldn't see the sky turning black. She couldn't see the storm building, but she could feel it. The house held its breath. A loud crack. The thunder boomed so hard, the whole farmhouse seemed to jump. Muriel flinched. "Oh dear, what was that?" Courage rushed to her side, placed a paw gently on her hand, then pressed his cheek to her fingers, the same way he always did. "I'm here. You're safe." The lights flickered, then went out completely. Darkness for Courage. But for Muriel, it had already been there. Still, now the world matched her shadows. Muriel slowly stood. "I think I should go lie down, dear," she said quietly, feeling the air around her. But the wind outside groaned again. Courage looked toward the hallway. Something had fallen. A picture frame. Glass scattered across the floor. It wasn't safe. So he acted. Courage stepped in front of her, tapped her shin gently. Once, twice, turn. He led her around the broken glass, down the hallway, one soft step at a time. When she wavered, he pressed against her leg. When she paused, he stopped completely. Together, they moved through the dark, as if they were dancing. Not fast, but in perfect rhythm. When they reached her room, Courage pulled the blanket down, arranged the pillows, then gently helped her into bed. She reached out, found his ears, and gave them a loving pat. "You're my eyes now, Courage, and you see better than anyone." He didn't leave her side that night. He lay curled on the floor, one paw on her bed, listening to her breathing until it settled into the deep, peaceful rhythm of sleep. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, there was only stillness and safety. The storm had passed. Outside, the windmill turned slowly again, not in panic, but in peace. The sky had cleared. Golden light spread through the clouds like a soft apology. And inside the farmhouse, everything was still. Courage lay curled beside Muriel's bed, his head resting gently on her blanket. He hadn't moved all night, not once, not even to eat. His whole world had been Muriel. And now, she stirred, a soft breath, a small shift under the covers. Then, slowly she sat up. Her hands searched for the edge of the bed. Her fingers found Courage's back. She smiled. "Still here, are you?" Courage blinked up at her, nuzzled closer. Then she paused. She turned her head slightly toward the window and squinted. "Oh, is that light?" Courage froze. Muriel stood slowly, moved to the window, step by careful step. Her hands brushed the sill. She looked up, and then she gasped. "I can see the sky." It wasn't everything, not completely, but the colors were back, the shapes, the outlines of the hills she loved, and in the corner of her eye, a familiar pink blur. "Courage," she whispered. "You stayed with me in the dark." She turned, kneeling, arms open, voice trembling. "And now I see you." She pulled him into a hug, longer than any before, tighter, full of breath and memory and thanks. Courage's eyes shimmered, not because he'd done something heroic, but because Muriel knew. She had felt him with her every step of the way, and now she saw him again. They stayed like that for a long while, wrapped in morning light, surrounded by the sound of silence that finally felt safe. Eustace wandered in, muttering. He blinked at them, shrugged, then walked past. Muriel just chuckled softly. "He didn't notice, but you always did." "Now, let the windmill turn slowly in your mind and drift with us back to nowhere." It started with a letter. Muriel found it in the mailbox one sunny morning. The envelope was too clean, too official, too cold. She opened it, read it slowly, and her hands began to tremble. "They say we're behind on taxes," she whispered. "They're going to take the farm." Eustace didn't react. But Courage, his ears shot up. "No, not this place. Not their little crooked house. Not the kitchen, with Muriel's favorite chair, or the field where they picked apples in summer. The farm wasn't just land. It was memory. It was laughter. It was every hug Courage ever got." So he leapt into action. He tried fixing up the house painting, patching, polishing. He tried making money opening lemonade stands, washing space aliens' spaceships, even babysitting bizarre creatures for a few coins. Each plan got stranger. Each day, more desperate. And Muriel? She never once asked him to do any of it. "You don't need to do this for me, dear," she'd say gently. But Courage would just shake his head, because he did. He needed to, because this was his way of loving back. One night, Courage sat in the barn, covered in dust, his eyes tired, his body slumped. The jar of coins was barely full, and the letter still sat by the fireplace. He curled up next to it and let out the softest whimper. Then Muriel appeared. She sat down beside him in the straw, didn't say anything, just rested her hand on his back. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you are my home." The morning after the barn, Courage was different. Tired, yes, but more determined than ever. He paced the yard with purpose, studying the fields, the fences, the sky, like a tiny general preparing for one last stand. The coin jar still sat on the windowsill, light, nearly empty. But Courage had one final idea. A contest, a wild one. Something hosted by a mysterious figure from the local radio. A game show for weird creatures with stranger talents. And the prize, exactly what they needed to pay the taxes. It sounded ridiculous, and it was. The rules were unclear. The challenges made no sense. But courage entered anyway. For Muriel, he faced off against a chicken from space who juggled asteroids, a floating toe with a banjo, a duck who could recite the alphabet backward in 3 languages. And courage? He danced, not well, not gracefully, but fiercely, and he won. Because sometimes love beats logic. Back home, Muriel had no idea where he'd gone. She sat by the fireplace, humming softly. She couldn't read the letter anymore. It hurt too much. "At least we had good years here," she whispered. "That's more than some folks get." And just then, the door burst open. Courage tumbled in, dusty and grinning, carrying a check bigger than himself. Muriel blinked. What on earth? He dropped it into her lap, panting softly, eyes full of exhausted pride. She read the words, paused, then gasped. "Courage, you did this?" He nodded, and she did what she always did when words weren't enough. She hugged him, tighter than usual, longer, with everything in her. Later that night, as the windmill turned slow again, and the house once more felt like theirs, Muriel poured him a tiny dish of tea. "You saved our home, dear. But more than that, you reminded me why it's worth saving." The farm had been saved, for now. The money was paid. The letter was gone. The roof no longer felt like it could be taken from them. But the world doesn't rest for long. A storm came that week. Not just wind, not just rain. A full, bone-shaking, house-rattling, nowhere storm. The kind that made the windmill groan. The kind that made the barn doors slam wide. The kind that turned familiar corners into shadows. Courage stood at the window, watching. Muriel was calm as she always was. She sipped tea, humming a low lullaby. Unbothered. But then came the knock. A long, slow knock on the door. And a deep voice. "Your land will not last. It belongs to the wind now." Courage opened the door to find a stranger. A ghostly figure in a swirling cloak, with eyes like storm clouds and hands like branches. He claimed to be the keeper of forgotten places. "This farm has outlived its time," he said. "It's cracked, it's tired, it's ready to return to the earth." Muriel stood behind Courage. "Not while we live here," she said kindly but firmly. "This house is loved." The figure laughed, and with a sweep of his cloak, the skies opened wider. Lightning struck the field. The barn roof trembled. The wind howled like an ancient cry. And Courage, he ran outside, into the mud, into the cold, into the center of the storm. He barked at the sky. He howled at the wind. He stood between the house and the storm, like a little wall of pink fury. And something happened. The wind shifted. The thunder paused. And that strange, swirling figure tilted his head. "Why fight for something so small?" he asked. "Why cling to an old place no one else wants?" Courage turned around, looked back at the house. Through the window, he saw Muriel, rocking in her chair, tea in hand, eyes full of love. He pointed. "That's why." The figure smiled, not kindly, but with respect. "Then let it stand, for now." And with that, the storm faded. The skies calmed. The windmill creaked softly once more. Courage came back inside, soaked and shivering. Muriel wrapped him in a towel. "You silly little thing," she whispered, brushing his ear. "You'd fight the whole world for me, wouldn't you?" He nodded, slowly, and she kissed the top of his head.
The next morning came, like a breath held overnight. Finally, exhaled. The sky was clear, the fields wet and sparkling, and the farmhouse still there, standing, sturdy, a little crooked, yes,
but full of warmth. Muriel stepped outside in her slippers. Courage followed her, still wrapped in a towel like a tiny pink burrito. She looked out at the land, at the barn, the apple tree, the soft hills that caught sunlight just right. And she smiled. "It's still here, Courage. You kept it here." He wagged his tail slowly. Then she did something she rarely did. She sat right there in the grass, pulled him onto her lap, and whispered, "You saved more than a house, you know. You saved everything good that's happened here." She began to recall the pies she'd baked, the storms they'd weathered, the birthday songs she'd hummed into the oven. Even Eustace, for all his grumbles, had softened in this place once or twice. Courage curled into her chest. His breathing slowed, because in that moment, the farmhouse wasn't just a setting. It was a witness to love, to struggle, to comfort, to courage. Later that day, Muriel planted wildflowers along the fence. "Just to remind the earth we're staying," she said. Courage helped, pawing at the dirt, sneezing every time the wind blew petals into his nose. And that night, they sat on the porch in silence, watching the windmill turn against the gentlest sky nowhere had seen in weeks. Inside, the walls were still worn. The floor still creaked. The curtains still danced in the draft. But it was home, not because it was perfect, not because it was untouched, but because someone had fought to keep it full of love. Now, let me tell you a story some people might not believe. Because if you've watched this show, you know Eustace. Grumpy, grumbly, always hiding behind his newspaper or mask. But not always. Sometimes, and only for a breath, even he let something warm show through. And when it happened, it stayed with us. Because those small, quiet flickers of care, they matter more than anyone realizes. Tonight, we go back to that one strange day when something wasn't right in the farmhouse, and Courage wasn't himself. It began with silence. Not the usual peaceful silence of the farmhouse, but a quiet that made the house feel too still. Courage wasn't barking. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't even peeking out windows or trembling at shadows. He was curled in his bed, eyes open, blanket untouched. And Muriel noticed. "Something's wrong with my little Courage," she said gently, kneeling down. She tried tea. She tried snacks. She even hummed his favorite lullaby. But Courage didn't move. Eustace? He didn't say much. Just mumbled something about lazy mutts and went back to his chair. But as the day wore on, even Eustace grew uneasy. Courage hadn't eaten, hadn't yelped, hadn't once flinched when he shouted, "Stupid dog!" Something was different. That evening, Muriel sat on the porch, worried. She said softly, "I don't like it, Eustace. What if he's really sick?" Eustace just grunted. But later, when Muriel was asleep, Eustace wandered over to Courage. Not loudly, not with a growl. He just stood there, watching. Then did something no one would have expected. He took off his hat. Just for a moment, he bent down and left something beside Courage's bed. His old slipper, the one Courage used to chew as a pup. The one he'd always hide in the pantry. "Figure you miss this, stupid mutt." He muttered it so low, you wouldn't catch the softness in his voice unless you were listening real close. Then he shuffled away, back to his chair. But behind him, Courage blinked and reached out, just barely, placing a paw over the slipper. Morning came slow. A cool wind brushed over the fields. The sky was pale and hushed, like the whole world was waiting. Inside the farmhouse, Muriel was already bustling gently, trying not to disturb Courage as he rested. But something had shifted. He'd moved in the night. Not far. Just enough to pull Eustace's old slipper close. Close enough that it touched his chest when he breathed. Muriel knelt beside him again. "Well, now, you've still got a little spark in you." She smiled. "That's my brave wee dog." And in her voice, tender as ever, you could feel the hope return. In the other room, Eustace was pretending not to notice, reading the paper, or trying to. He kept peeking over the top, watching Courage, frowning. And when Muriel walked out to hang the laundry, he did it again. Another small act. He shuffled to the kitchen, pulled out one of Muriel's soup pots, clumsily opened a can of beans, then another, then a carrot, dropped in a potato, stirred it once, burned it slightly. But when he brought the bowl to Courage's bed, he said nothing, just set it down quietly, sat in his chair, and turned on the old radio. At first, Courage didn't move, but the smell, the warmth, it crept toward him like a hug. He sniffed. Then, slowly, he got up, wobbled over, and licked the spoon. Eustace didn't look up, but his hand drifted down, resting on the arm of the chair. And Courage bowl forgotten for a moment, curled near that hand. Not touching, just close. And Eustace didn't move away. He didn't pet him, didn't scold, just sat there, and let him stay. Outside, the windmill turned steady. Inside, something softer had begun to turn too. Not a full change, not a miracle, but a flicker, a warmth, a maybe. The day passed gently. Courage was moving again, not bounding, not leaping at shadows like usual, but walking, carefully, softly. He stayed close to Eustace. Not because he was scared, but because something unspoken had formed in the quiet between them. Muriel noticed. She smiled to herself while baking. Didn't say a word. Sometimes it's better not to name a miracle until it finishes unfolding. That evening, the sun dipped low. The farmhouse glowed with golden shadows. And Eustace, still seated in his chair, reached for a small wooden box from behind the shelf. He hadn't touched it in years. Inside, a photo, old, faded, curled at the edges. It showed a younger Eustace, standing beside someone who looked like his mother, tall, stern, her arms crossed, a dog beside her. Muriel peeked in. Haven't seen that picture in ages. Eustace just stared at it. Didn't blink. Didn't speak. Then, without looking, he placed the photo on the floor near Courage. "That mutt there," he said quietly, "was the only thing that ever listened to me as a kid." Courage tilted his head. Ears lifted. The photo was blurry, but the dog in it looked kind, loyal, a little like Courage. Eustace didn't say anything else. But Courage moved closer. Not to the photo, to Eustace. Sat at his feet. Tail wagging once, then still. For the first time in a long time, Eustace reached down and touched Courage's head. Just one pat. "You're all right," he muttered. And for Eustace, that was a poem. The sun dipped below the hills. The room grew dim, but something warm stayed lit between them. Not a fire, not a lamp. Something older, something real. That night, the windmill barely turned. The sky was still. The farmhouse sighed like an old friend finally finding rest. Muriel had gone to bed early. She'd left a candle burning low in the kitchen. Its light flickered softly over the wooden floor. Courage sat in the hallway, not because he was scared, but because he just wanted to stay near Eustace's chair. Eustace wasn't asleep. He sat quietly, hat pulled low, hands folded. And when he noticed Courage hadn't gone to bed yet, he spoke. "You think I'm a bad man, don't you?" The question floated in the room like smoke. Courage tilted his head. Didn't bark, didn't blink, just listened. "I didn't have much growing up. No soft chairs, no warm tea. Just hard hands and harder words." He looked down at his old slippers. One was missing again, hidden, probably, behind the couch by a certain pink dog. He almost smiled. Then your Muriel came along. Made this place feel like more than a shack. And you. He looked at Courage now. You just kept sticking around, even when I didn't want you to. Courage stood, walked over, climbed slowly into Eustace's lap. Not with a bounce, but a tired kind of trust. And Eustace didn't stop him. He didn't shove him off. He didn't groan or grumble. He just let Courage curl up there, his tiny body rising and falling with each breath. "You're not so stupid after all," Eustace whispered. And this time, his voice didn't sound annoyed. It sounded like a thank you, hidden in an insult. The candle flickered lower. The farmhouse grew quiet. And in that chair, a man and a dog, who had never quite understood each other, finally sat in peace. Muriel peeked in once, saw them both. Said nothing, just smiled, turned off the light, and let them rest. Now, we will continue our journey to nowhere, not for ghosts or shadows, but for a pair of bickering, stubborn, hilarious brothers. The Duck Brothers. Two aliens who never quite saw eye to eye, but still needed each other more than they knew. And when they got separated, when ego and pride kept them apart, Courage was the one who brought them back together. Because even the strangest beings deserve a second chance at love. It started with a crash. A soft one. Not the kind that breaks windows, but the kind that startles birds and knocks over Muriel's best tomato plant. Courage peeked outside, and there, in the middle of the cornfield, was a glowing spacecraft. Small, shaped like an egg, with blinking lights and a loud, quacking voice shouting, "I don't need you, you lazy fool." Out stumbled one of the Duck Brothers, green, angry, waddling in circles. I told him to fix the stabilizer, but no, he had to rewire the sandwich dispenser instead. Courage blinked. This was going to be interesting. The Duck Brother had crash-landed after an argument with his twin. They'd been traveling the galaxy, bickering non-stop, until one big fight sent them spiraling literally in opposite directions. Now he was stuck in nowhere. Muriel offered him tea. He refused. Eustace offered him nothing. He complained about aliens ruining the crops. But courage. He listened. As the duck grumbled, Courage sat close, nodding at the right times. He didn't need to speak. He just let the duck talk himself in circles. And eventually, that anger began to soften. "He's my brother," the duck mumbled. "I know he's a fool, but I hate when he's not around." So Courage made a plan. Find the other duck. Somehow. Maybe with a signal. Or a beacon made from old toasters and vacuum tubes. Whatever it took, he'd bring them back together. Because Courage knew, even the loudest fights don't mean you've stopped loving someone. That night, under a sky full of blinking stars, Courage got to work. He dragged out parts from the barn, old radios, broken TVs, bent weather vanes. Muriel helped. She brought Courage her finest tea kettle, because every good invention needs something that whistles. The duck brother hovered nearby, arms crossed, still grumbling. "He probably doesn't even realize I'm gone. Bet he's enjoying the peace and quiet." But every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward the sky, waiting. Courage cobbled together a strange little machine. It beeped. It buzzed. It sparked a little too much. But when he pressed the button, a glowing pulse rose into the air, soft and shimmering like a musical firefly. It was a signal. A message. One only the other duck brother would understand. Far, far away, aboard a lonely little spacecraft drifting over a moonlit canyon. The second duck brother sat with his feet up, watching a tiny screen. When the signal reached him, it blinked 3 soft colors. He froze. Then slammed the controls. Back in nowhere, the wind shifted. The stars hummed, and from the north, a familiar whir. The second ship landed crooked, just outside the barn, and out tumbled. "Brother?" The reunion wasn't soft at first. There was yelling, quacking, pointing, accusations about who forgot the coolant and who ate the last moon sandwich. But under all that, relief. Courage watched from a distance until, tail still, eyes warm. He didn't need credit. He just needed them to see what he'd seen all along. That love can be loud, but it's still love. Eventually, the brothers quieted. They stood there, arms crossed. Then, one of them reached into the ship, pulled out a tiny, strange-looking device, handed it to Courage. "You're weird, but you're all right." It was a translator, one that would let Courage understand any alien in the galaxy. Muriel gasped. "What a gift, my sweet little baby." Eustace, still unimpressed, "Ask them if they'll fix the tomato plant." The sky was still star-speckled. The signal had been answered, and the Duck brothers were together again. Both ships sat in the cornfield, blinking softly. Inside the farmhouse, Muriel was already setting the table. "They may be aliens," she said with a smile, "but no one leaves nowhere hungry." Courage helped place the plates. 2 extra chairs. Some tea. And, at the Duck brothers' insistence, pickles. Apparently, intergalactic tradition. The brothers sat awkwardly at first. They kept elbowing each other, repeating old insults, arguing over who was taller. They were the exact same height. But every now and then, one would smirk. The other would grin. And something in the air began to soften. After dinner, They walked outside. One turned to the other. "Ready to go?" "Yeah, guess we should." They loaded into the ship. Lights flickering, engines humming. And just before takeoff, they stopped. The first duck brother climbed back out. He walked toward Courage and handed him something wrapped in foil. "A moon sandwich," he said. "You earned it." Then the other followed. He pulled something from his pocket, a little glowing badge. "Just in case you ever want to visit." Courage wagged his tail, eyes wide, softly trembling with joy. He didn't expect gifts or thanks, but he got both. Because even ducks, especially those ducks, know when they've been saved by someone brave. Then something surprising happened. They paused again, and one said, "Actually, we were thinking." They looked at each other, then at the farmhouse, then at Muriel, waving gently from the porch. "Maybe we don't leave just yet." And so they didn't. Not that night. They parked their ships behind the barn, turned off the engines, and watched the stars from the front porch beside Courage and Muriel. They didn't speak much, but sometimes the most healing part of reuniting is just being still, in the same space, for a little while. The sun rose gently over nowhere. Soft, honey-colored light spilled across the fields, lighting up the ships tucked behind the barn. Inside the farmhouse, you could hear the clink of teacups and quiet, early laughter. The Duck brothers were still there, but this morning they weren't bickering. They were building something. Out in the yard, they stacked boxes, angled wires, attached spinning, blinking doodads. Muriel watched from the kitchen window, drying dishes with a fond smile. Courage trotted over, curious. "It's a gift," one of the ducks muttered. "A long-distance communicator," the other added. "So we can call you from anywhere." "Or argue with each other from across planets," one joked. But their eyes were warm. They weren't teasing. Not really. They were grateful. They placed it in the barn, right beside Courage's little nest of blankets. It lit up softly, waiting. By midday, the time finally came. They loaded their ships, checked their wobbly stabilizers, waved at Muriel, who sent them off with a sack of warm cookies. And then, before they climbed aboard, they did something Courage never expected. They hugged him, both at once. Wings tight, feathers tickling his fur. "You're a weird little guy, but you've got heart. Big one. Thanks for helping fools like us remember what matters." And with that, they took off. The ships glowed brighter than usual, sailed into the blue like twin stars dancing in daylight. And just like that, they were gone. But this time, they weren't apart. Courage stood in the yard. The communicator in the barn blinked once, then twice, then again. A little sign that they were out there, laughing, squabbling, but together. Muriel joined him. She put a hand on his head. "You've got a way of keeping hearts stitched, my dear." And he leaned into her. Because even when the world is strange, and the creatures stranger still, love is love. And courage always finds a way. Pure. Next story is one of the quietest kinds of courage, the kind that doesn't roar. It trembles, but it still moves forward. Because sometimes we do the scariest things, just to make someone we love smile. It started with a flyer, bright pink. taped to a crooked fence post in town. Come one, come all. The annual Nowhere Fun Fair. Muriel's eyes lit up when she saw it. Oh, Courage, we must go. It's been ages since I had cotton candy. Courage forced a smile. His tail wagged, but his paws shook just a little. Because Courage was terrified of the carnival. He remembered it from years ago. The twisted mirrors, the laughing clowns, the spinning rides that made the ground feel far, far away. The fun fair wasn't fun for him. But Muriel, she was already humming with excitement. She pulled out her purple coat, tied her bonnet, and even packed homemade jelly cookies for the walk. You'll come with me, won't you, dear? Courage hesitated. But when he looked at her face, soft, bright, hopeful, he nodded. His voice was small, but he meant it. The fair was already buzzing when they arrived. Colorful lights, distant music, a mechanical clown by the gate that waved and creaked when you passed. Courage whimpered. Muriel gently took his paw. Don't worry, darling. If you get nervous, just squeeze my hand. They walked through the booths. Muriel laughed as she tossed rings over milk bottles. One, a tiny stuffed goose, gave it to Courage. You keep this for bravery. But the real test was coming. The House of Mirrors. Muriel wanted to go inside. I used to love these as a little girl, she beamed. Courage froze. The shifting walls, the reflections, the distorted faces moved when you did. It was too much. But Muriel looked so joyful, so gentle. So Courage stepped forward, one paw, then the next. And together they walked in. Inside the House of Mirrors, everything was quiet. And not in a comforting way. It echoed, creaked, reflected things that didn't move quite right. Courage stood still. His reflection multiplied. 5 of him, 10, 20, each one wide-eyed, uncertain. Muriel walked ahead. Ooh, look at this funny face. She laughed at a mirror that made her nose long and her feet tiny. Courage tried to laugh too. But behind the laughter, the shadows stretched, and somewhere deep in the maze, a figure flickered. It looked like Muriel, but not quite. Too tall, too quiet. Her smile, not warm, but painted. Courage gasped. He turned, but the real Muriel was gone from view. Just mirrors. Just versions of himself staring back, and the air grew colder. He trembled, ears down, heart pounding. The lights flickered. A clown face blinked from one mirror, its mouth stretched too wide. He wanted to run. He almost did. But then, a small sound. Courage? It was Muriel. Not far, her voice soft, worried. Where are you, dear? Courage paused. The fear didn't leave. But the reason to push through it got louder. Her voice, her trust, her gentle belief in him, always. He clutched the tiny stuffed goose she'd won for him, held it close, took a breath, and stepped forward. He bumped into 2 mirrors, bonked his nose on a 3rd. But he kept going, until finally, he rounded a corner. And there she was, Muriel, standing patiently, smiling like sunrise. There you are, sweetheart. I was starting to think I'd lost you. Courage rushed into her arms, and for a long moment, the mirrors stopped feeling so scary, because what they reflected now was love. They walked the rest of the way together. Muriel let Courage lead, and with each step he took, he grew a little taller on the inside. Outside the House of Mirrors, the world felt softer. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of roasted peanuts and cotton candy. Courage sat quietly beside Muriel on a bench near the carousel. He didn't shake anymore, but his eyes were heavy, a little tired, a little overwhelmed. Muriel looked at him, really looked at him. And then she reached into her coat pocket. "I was saving this for later," she said, "but I think you've more than earned it now." She pulled out a little red ribbon. It had a gold button sewn in the center. A homemade medal. "For bravery," she said softly. "Not for facing monsters, but for facing yourself." She pinned it gently to his chest. Courage blinked, then teared up. He didn't bark, didn't squeal. He just leaned into her lap and stayed there. The fair rolled on around them, lights flashing, music playing, laughter echoing. But in that moment, the loudest thing in the world was silent. And it was beautiful. Eustace, of course, was nearby, trying to win a toaster at the strength test game. He grumbled something about soft dogs and silly ribbons. But Muriel just smiled. "Everyone's afraid of something, Eustace, but not everyone's brave enough to admit it." Courage peeked up at her, and in his eyes, peace. Later that evening, they walked slowly back through the fair. Courage still held the little stuffed goose. The metal still shined faintly against his fur. And Muriel, she held his paw. Tighter now. She knew. She always knew how much he gave up inside, just to walk beside her without fear. And that's what made her love him even more. The stars were beginning to peek through the sky, soft and sleepy, just like Courage. The fair had started to quiet. Booths were closing. The lights dimmed, and a warm hush settled over the field. But Muriel had one last wish. "Before we go home," she whispered, "just one ride on the Ferris wheel." Courage blinked. The Ferris wheel. The very tall Ferris wheel. His ears twitched nervously. But Muriel looked so gentle, so peaceful. "It was always my favorite part," she said. "When you're at the top, it feels like flying." Courage looked at the ground, then at her hopeful smile. He took a breath, then nodded. The ride creaked as they climbed in. The seats swayed a little. Courage squeezed Muriel's hand the whole way up, eyes wide, heart racing. But then they reached the top, and everything changed. The lights of the fair sparkled below. The fields stretched out into the quiet night. The sky above looked close enough to touch. Muriel sighed. "Isn't it beautiful?" Courage turned to her, and what he saw wasn't the view. It was her, smiling, content, happy in a way only he had made possible tonight. And suddenly, he didn't feel afraid. Not one bit. As they slowly descended again, Muriel rested her head on his. "Thank you, my brave little darling," she whispered. "You always make the scariest things feel safe." They walked home under a sky full of stars. The little medal on Courage's chest caught the moonlight. The stuffed goose bounced in his paw. And with each step, his heart felt a little bigger. Not because he'd defeated something terrifying, but because he did it for love. Back in the farmhouse, Muriel tucked him in herself, gave him a warm cookie, kissed his head, and whispered one last time, "I'm proud of you." Courage sighed, snuggled under the covers, and for the first time in a long time, he slept without fear. The next story is about something small, so small it could fit in your palm. But sometimes, the tiniest things can carry the greatest love. It started on a foggy morning in nowhere. Muriel was in the kitchen humming, mixing batter for pancakes shaped like stars. Courage padded outside to fetch the paper, but there, just by the porch steps, he stopped. A small round egg sat in the dirt, white, speckled with gold flecks, and gently rocking. Courage tilted his head, sniffed, listened, and from inside the shell came the softest little tap. Tap, tap. There were no nests nearby, no footprints, no sign of who it might belong to. Courage gently scooped it up with his paws, wrapped it in a warm scarf, and brought it inside. Muriel looked surprised. "Oh my, a little traveler. We best keep it warm while we find its mummy." They built a nest in a teacup, placed it by the stove. Courage sat beside it, watching, protecting. Hours passed. No one came looking. That night, as the wind howled and Eustace snored in his chair, Courage stayed curled around the little egg. It wobbled, tapped, glowed faintly under the firelight. He didn't sleep. Not really. He just stayed, present, gentle, listening for life. Night passed slowly. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees. Inside, Courage sat curled near the fire, nose tucked, ears perked. And just before dawn, crack. He lifted his head. Another soft crack, then a pop. Tiny pieces of eggshell split open, and out peeked the smallest face he'd ever seen. It was a baby bird, round, fluffy, a little too big for the teacup now. It blinked at Courage, cheeped once, and nestled against him like he was home. Muriel woke to the sound and gasped with joy. "Oh, Courage, look at this wee miracle." They named it Pebble, because it was small, but already strong. Pebble followed Courage everywhere, hopped beside him while he fetched the paper, tried to help him chase Eustace's slipper, unsuccessfully. At night, it curled beneath Courage's chin, its little heart fluttering like a music box. But Courage knew, as much as he loved this soft new friend, Pebble wasn't meant to stay. He climbed the roof that evening with a telescope, searched the skies, spotted a nest high in the canyon cliffs just outside nowhere. That was it. That was home. The next morning, Courage packed a small bag, a warm scarf, a thermos of soup Muriel made, and a pouch to keep Pebble safe. Muriel hugged them both. "Be gentle, but be strong," she whispered. "And remember, the best journeys come from love." And so they set out. Past the crooked fence, over the sunflower field, toward the cliffs where the wind whistled stories only birds could understand. Pebble chirped softly inside the pouch, not scared, just curious. Courage smiled down at them, heart steady. He didn't know what dangers might wait. But this little life, this little heartbeat beside his, it was worth every step. The cliffs loomed tall, jagged rocks, twisting winds, and narrow trails that dipped in and out of shadows. But Courage didn't stop. Pebble peeked from the pouch on his chest, chirping softly, trusting fully. They had already crossed creeks, tiptoed past a sleeping coyote, and camped beneath a willow that whispered lullabies in the wind. And now, the final climb. Courage tested each stone with care. His paws trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of how much he loved this tiny bird. Halfway up, they stopped to rest on a ledge. Courage sipped Muriel's soup from the thermos, then gave the last drops to Pebble. The little bird tilted its head. Then, ever so gently, it chirped a tune Courage didn't recognize. High and sweet, a song it had never been taught, but somehow remembered. A song that belonged to someone far above. The sun began to set, painting the canyon in rose and gold. At last, Courage reached the final stretch, a steep path carved into the rock, winding up toward a nest perched between two ancient trees. Pebble chirped louder now, not scared, hopeful. Suddenly, a rustle, something large. Courage froze. From above, a shadow passed over the rocks, and then a call, not a roar, not a growl, a bird's cry, deep, low, aching. The mother, a giant skybird, elegant and fierce, swooped low above them. She circled once, twice, then landed gently near the nest. Her eyes scanned the rock below, and locked with Courage's. There was a pause, the kind that holds 1,000 meanings. Then Courage stepped forward, unlatched the pouch, and lifted Pebble in both paws. The baby chirped. Once, twice. The mother's eyes softened. She cried out again, a gentler sound this time, and stretched her wings. Pebble chirped in Courage's paws. The mother bird stepped closer. Her wings spread, not in warning, but welcome. And Pebble? Pebble looked up, then looked back. One last time. There was no fear. Just the soft ache of parting. The kind that says, "You kept me safe. And now I'll fly." Courage leaned forward, held Pebble close to his cheek for a moment. A final cuddle. Then gently, he placed the baby into the nest. The mother moved in beside her chick, nuzzled it, tucked Pebble safely beneath her wing. And from high above the cliffs, a new sound rose into the sky, a lullaby of home, of return, of reunion. Courage watched for a long moment, not moving. And then, the mother bird looked at him, with eyes as deep as starlight. She bowed her head, just once, a thank you that needed no words. As Courage turned to climb back down, the stars began to shimmer. The wind slowed. The world felt right. Not just because Pebble was safe, but because love, once again, had found its way home. He returned to the farmhouse late that night. Muriel was waiting at the window. Warm soup, soft slippers, a tight, grateful hug. "Well done, sweetheart," she whispered. "You've always had the gentlest paws." Courage curled into his blanket, the pouch now empty, but his heart more full than ever. And as he drifted to sleep, he swore he could hear a faint little chirp, high above, carried by the wind. Next story is one of the most silent we've ever told, but it speaks the loudest. About love, about life, and about how even something rooted in the ground can feel your heart when you hold it close. It started when a tree grew in nowhere, but not just any tree. It appeared suddenly, planted itself behind the farmhouse, and within days it bloomed. Lush leaves, golden apples. A light breeze that whispered comfort through every branch. Muriel loved it. She sat beneath it with her knitting. Courage napped at its roots. Even the crops began to thrive nearby. But Eustace, he didn't like it. Said it was too fancy. That it made the grass grow weird. That it didn't belong. He grumbled louder every day. Watched it from the window with narrowing eyes. And one morning, he wheeled out his rusted axe. Courage tried to stop him. Pulled at his leg. Barked. Begged. But Eustace pushed past him. One swing, then another, and the sound echoed like thunder. The final crack felt like it split the sky. The tree fell, heavy and slow. Muriel gasped. Courage just stood there, watching the leaves tumble, watching the golden fruit roll away in the dirt, watching something sacred snap. The days after felt wrong. The sun dimmed. The wind stopped singing. The garden wilted. Even Muriel's humming faded. Eustace didn't care. But Courage did. He returned to the stump, alone, and then he hugged it. No music played. No miracle happened right away. He just held it, softly, lovingly, like the roots might still remember so what it felt like to be wanted. The sky over nowhere stayed dim. The wind stayed still. Even the bugs seemed quieter. Courage sat by the stump every morning. He didn't bark, didn't cry. He just showed up. Sometimes he brought water in a tiny teacup. Sometimes he brushed the bark with Muriel's old broom. Sometimes he just laid his paw on it and whispered, not in words, but in feelings. Days passed. The stump remained still. Until one night, the wind blew. Just once. Soft, warm. Courage perked up. Looked around, and the air shimmered just faintly above the stump. A golden glimmer, barely brighter than a firefly, rose from the cracked center of the wood, like a memory surfacing. It didn't move fast. It didn't light up the whole field, but it hovered and pulsed and drifted toward Courage. He reached out, and it sank into his paw. Suddenly, he remembered the tree's laughter when squirrels danced in it, Muriel's smile beneath its leaves, the warm naps it offered, the whisper it made when it rained, like a lullaby just for them. He gasped. It was still here. All of it. The next morning, Courage did something different. He brought a little apple seed, one he had saved from the golden fruit. He dug a small hole beside the stump. Not too deep, just enough. And he placed the seed in gently, like tucking in a child. Muriel joined him later. She didn't say much. She had just placed a hand on his back. "I think it still hears you, dear," she whispered. "You've always known how to love the quiet things." And that night, the stars came out again. Not many, not bright, but enough. Days passed, then weeks. The garden remained dry. The skies stayed pale. But Courage returned to the stump every single morning. He watered the soil, whispered into the wind, wrapped his little scarf around the base on colder days. He never asked for the tree to return. He just wanted it to know it was still loved. And then, one quiet morning, as the sky yawned open in soft golds and purples, Courage noticed it. A sprout, tiny, delicate. A single leaf curled toward the sky. But it was there, growing just beside the old stump. He gasped, eyes wide, tail stiff. Then he dropped to his paws and pressed his cheek to the earth. It was warm, alive. He ran inside to Muriel, tugged her gently to the door. She stepped out in her slippers and robe, blinking at the sunlight. Oh, oh, courage. She crouched beside the sprout, touched it gently. It heard you. Courage nodded. No bark, just a sigh. That afternoon, the breeze returned, light and playful. The air smelled faintly of apples and soil. Birds returned to the fence posts. Muriel hummed again while hanging laundry. And Courage? He lay beside the sprout, dozing peacefully. Every now and then, the tiny leaf would shiver like it was listening, and he smiled in his sleep. Later that week, Eustace stomped outside, shovel in hand. He grumbled, sneered at the sprout. Bah, that again? But before he could take a step, Courage stood tall, not barking, just standing, firm, still, protective. For once, Eustace didn't argue. He simply turned and shuffled back inside. Because love, when quiet, can still be powerful. The little sprout grew quietly. Each day, a new leaf. Each night, the stars above blinked a little brighter. Courage watered it with care, sang little songs beneath it, and sometimes just sat in silence, his paws crossed, eyes soft. Then one morning, a single golden apple appeared, tiny, wobbly, barely the size of a marble. But there it was, proof that life had not only returned, but remembered what it once was. Courage didn't eat it. He placed it gently on the windowsill, where the light could kiss it each morning. Muriel saw it, held it like something sacred. Oh my, it came back to thank you, didn't it? Courage nodded, just once. The tree kept growing, not all at once, but slow and certain. Its shade returned to the yard. The birds made nests again. Even the ground beneath it felt softer. And one day, Courage curled up beneath it. Older now, quieter. He closed his eyes. And just like before, the breeze began to hum, soft, loving. A lullaby only he could hear. He wasn't hugging the stump anymore. He was resting beneath branches, cradled by the very thing he once protected. And if you looked closely, you could see the shape of the old stump inside the new tree. It hadn't vanished. It had become something even stronger. No one ever talked about it. Eustace pretended it wasn't there. Muriel just smiled when it bloomed. But every evening, as the sun dipped low, Courage sat beneath it, tail gently wagging, heart completely still. And now, dear dreamer, let the wind carry you. Let the roots hold you. Tonight, you've wandered through silence and memory, through love that doesn't need to speak, and through the quiet power of simply staying near. Courage reminded us, you don't need to roar to make a difference. You just need to care, and keep caring. So rest easy now. The tree is growing, the wind has returned, and you are safe. Wherever you are, whoever you are, know that your love matters. We'll be back soon with more soft stories from nowhere. But until then, sleep deeply, breathe softly, and remember, you are never alone under this sky. Good night, little light. We'll see you next time